Mr. Graham Alvord joined the Army in 1941, a recent graduate from Harvard College following the call of President Roosevelt. He was initially working in intelligence work, but when his brother died in the Battle of Midway as a Marine aviator, he volunteered for ship duty. He was assigned to landing ship tank number 133. As such, he landed in France for the first time on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. The ship for which Mr. Alvord was executive officer, the LST-133, is believed to be the first ship to land on the Omaha beach. It struck a mine on its third trip there, after which it still unloaded the soldiers it carried. For his bravery during World War II, he has been awarded the American Defense Medal, the American Campaign Medal, and the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, and a 1-star for the invasion of Normandy. Today, Mr. Alvord lives in Kittery Point, Maine, with his wife, Jean. He had a successful career as a high school teacher for Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and having been to France many times since his service, he maintains a love and respect for the French people. His first time back to the beaches of Normandy in 1970 was a time when he was overcome with emotion. In order to honor and remember such incredible sacrifice, France presents the Legion of Honor. Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte established this award in 1802 to recognize his exemplary military and civilian services, and it is the oldest as well as the highest honor in France. Mr. Alvord's service and courage perfectly match the description of this award, and the Consul General, in the name of the President François Hollande, presented it to him in a quiet ceremony. Today, France continues to be grateful to American veterans for their efforts during the decisive campaign of northern France. Their contributions are exemplary models for all future generations. Thanks to the sacrifices of men and women such as Mr. Alvord, France and Germany have become today among the closest partners in the world. On May 22, 2015, Mr. Graham Alvord, who is now 99 years old, and his wife Jean, to whom he has been married for 71 years, welcomed me into their home in Kittery Point, Maine, and allowed me to record the interview that you are about to hear.
The early part of my life, which didn't seem so terribly interesting back then, but now that I look back, that wasn't so bad. I grew up in a suburb of Boston. My dad was a professor at Northeastern University. I was born prematurely. And that means that I started the first grade at the age of 4 years and 360 days, practically 5 years old. And I was a reasonably good student, but I was smaller than any other male in my classes. And that meant that I was always, in a sense, segregated from them. And I was too small to be of any use physically, so that I didn't get into any athletics at all. Later on in my life, I did a lot of hiking and climbing and bicycled 8 weeks through Europe. And when I was in my 60s, covered all the White Mountains. Wow. In winter. Wow. So, from being a wimp as a young kid, first grade, second grade, I gradually acquired my height and brain power, and things went okay.
I'd like you to tell us about what you were doing just prior to the war, and also about brothers and sisters that you had.
Well, I had finished college. Had an honors degree from Harvard, and that was of some interest because I had 2 years and then left college for 2 years and then came back in an entirely different subject. And in spite of that, I managed to get an honors degree, so I thought, well, I can't be too dumb. I considered going on to studies. I had seriously considered going into honors classes for a higher degree. and then for whatever reason decided not to, and was offered a job down in Washington, D.C. for the Washington Gas Light Company, where a family friend had a job and offered me a job down there. So one of my chief personal interests was theater. And in the year and a half that I was down in Washington, I wrote a couple of plays and put them on an amateur group. I even got one not amateur, professional opportunity for a week's performance. So that was an interesting part of my life. When the President, Roosevelt, proposed I can't say the name of the legislation, but Lend-Lease, that's Lend-Lease
to Britain, for England,
for Britain, because things were getting tougher and tougher over there for the Brits, and France had already given up, and we didn't know much about the Russians, but they were having trouble. And when that piece of legislation, it was passed by one vote, and I thought, okay, Hitler cannot expect really any serious help from us, and Hitler's going to go through the rest of Europe, and we'll be eventually wake up to the seriousness of it for us, and we'd probably be in the war for 15 years. Well, we didn't think of it as a big plus at the time, but we know what happened to push out of the war was the Japanese coming in. That meant that instead of a bare majority of one, all of a sudden the U.S. was practically 100% at war, because we could see the problems of Japan on our coast, and they practically wiped out the Pearl Harbor. So instead of this looking like a 15-year operation, it looked more like maybe a 5 or 10. And I went in and volunteered. In the 2 years between my starting college and my going back to college, I had become a stenographer, and I was a pretty damn good one. So the result was that when I went into the Navy, they were desperate for people with abilities, language. So pretty soon they sent me to the naval operation down in Puerto Rico. And I stayed down in Puerto Rico for 2 years.
When we spoke before, you mentioned that you had a brother. That was another thing that...
That's right, my older brother. Yeah. And he went into the Marine Aviator early, I would say 3 years before I did. And he was a very good flyer. He took it on himself to take my father's ashes out to sea and drop them in the town where my father had a boat. And it was shortly after that the war came on, and he became active. He had an unfortunate thing happen. He had been in love with somebody that I knew and approved of. She was a very remarkable, gifted woman, great pianist, great violinist, great dancer. And they were married just before the war broke out. And they were separated almost immediately, and not just separated on this planet, on this side of the planet, but when he went out to Pearl Harbor and then sent to Midway Island, and he died in the battle. After the course of a certain amount of time, it didn't seem to me that I was needed very much down in Puerto Rico. But the U.S. was getting ready to create a fleet of vessels that would be able to travel on the shores. And they were looking for people to man those vessels. The vessels were called LST, which stands for Landing Ship Tanks. And they were large. The ship was 4,000 tons, about 325 feet long. Not a large crew, but an enormous vacancy in its middle space, and they had up at the front of it a ramp for things to get ashore. And for the size of our ship, you'd think we'd have an awful lot of larger people, but most of it was just that big space that we could take on heavy equipment and then discharge it on some shore. And the ship, the U.S., ended up creating 1,000 of those.
And those ships also carried troops, right?
Yes, for our operations were from Britain across the English Channel to France. And we would fill up the load tank with heavy equipment and then load on an upper deck open to the sky an awful lot more equipment, military equipment of various kinds, huge amounts of it. So when we were filled up, we carried an awful lot, and we did fill up. And I don't know if I told you about my little excitement. Just the day before we were leaving from England, we were in England about 3 months, training on, this is all in the, I wouldn't say hundreds, but there were scores of ships like us, and we were all getting ready for the invasion of on the French coast. There were so many of those ships around, vessels like ours and comparable ones, that to keep them properly located along the shore was difficult. So we had a lot of ships around.
How many troops could be on one of those ships? How many? Because they carried troops to shore.
Our crew was 10. And we had 2 other added to it, and those were medical people, because our ship was fitted out with space to accommodate wounded veterans. When we got rid of ours, we had space to take on the wounded and get treatment with doctors.
Well, that reminds me, we spoke the other day, you talked about, and because you were a good swimmer.
Yeah, before we left England, our screws picked up the chains.
Yeah.
We had chains going down to the bottom and coming up with a little flag on top. And those were available for us to tie ships to, so that we would have safety and not be bumping into other people.
It's like a mooring.
Like a mooring.
Yeah, right.
Out in the middle. And on this particular mooring, the wires that created the mooring got screwed up in our...
like the screws, the propellers in the back?
The propellers.
Yeah, in the back. Okay.
And there we were. We couldn't move anywhere because we had to get rid of those. The skipper happened to know that I had done a certain amount of swimming and also diving around, and so I got the job given to me to wear a small mask and a pair of shorts or something, and it was my job to go over the shore and keep an eye on the chain that was going from a flag up over in open air down to the bottom.
Right, where it was tangled.
And up at the top on the ship, they had a hold on the top of this wire, and it was my job to go down and see how it was twisted around our screw, and the men on top, 3 or 4 of them, could pull on the wire, but they wanted to make sure that it would be coming out neatly and not making the thing worse. So they were pulling up there, and I was down below making sure that they were doing it right. And every time I went down into the water, I got cold.
Yeah, this is in the North Atlantic, right?
North Atlantic.
Yeah, so it was.
Yeah.
How deep did you go? Do you remember?
Well, I didn't have to go that deep because my job was propeller depth, so it would be 20 feet or so.
But it was cold.
Well, it gradually got, it wasn't that cold to begin with, but I was a pretty good swimmer and had been in the water a lot. And if you're in it and out, you can keep going back and forth. But anyhow, my job was to keep them pulling accurately to gradually unscrew the operation.
No, the doctor came to your rescue.
It wasn't the doctor, it was the skipper.
Oh, the skipper. Oh, that's even, okay.
Well, the skipper, every ship was given a bunch of booze. I can't just tell you the name, it doesn't come out of my head. But so he could go and get some of that and give it to me, and I would stop shaking. And I'd go back down in until I started shaking again, and then it came up and got another swing, and on it went.
And that was only because it was for medicinal purposes, right?
That's right.
That was the reason you got that.
Yeah.
When did you first know, and what did you know about the coming invasion of Europe? When you first found out that it might be happening, or?
I think way back after I left Puerto Rico, and I think I must have known down there that one of the big elements of the war for us was an invasion of Europe. Mm-hmm. That was the Atlantic part. There was also a Pacific part, but I was in the Atlantic, so I knew things were going on against the Japanese. But
about what year would that have been? Would that be like 1943? You knew that?
Yeah. Yeah. I entered in 41, mm-hmm. And I think I entered the Navy in June of that. September was November. We ended the war.
Okay, so you were aware that something was going to happen, and the invasion. So, how were you prepared or trained for what was coming in terms of?
Well, there was a long training operation in the States for the kind of ship that I had operating from over a beach area, and what kind of ships would be used in that. But my memory of that is pretty fuzzy.
Do you remember where in the United States you trained? Or
what? Down in Virginia.
In Virginia.
Virginia.
So they were looking for beaches that would be similar to the ones that you were going to have to land on.
That's right.
And you practiced there. So that must have been pretty intensive. A lot of people involved probably.
But when we first got to England, that reminds me of something else. I'm tempted to say, taking a ship to Europe, there's a direct route like this, and that's the shortest one. And there's another route that goes up around and come around like that, which lengthens the whole process and keeps you at sea that much longer, and it's dangerous. And do you know why we had to do that great thing?
To avoid the submarines?
No. Huh? It was because Ireland was an enemy state.
Really?
The Irish don't like don't talk about that very much.
Huh.
But they were allied to Germany.
Really? I did not realize that.
And they kept, you don't hear a mention of it.
Right, we won't tell anybody. So, what specifically was your role on D-Day? What exactly did you have to do?
My job was executive officer on the ship, which meant that I was mostly in charge of directing the ship, keeping it going in the direction it ought to, also involved in keeping the crew operational.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you spoke of having. I think you said you made three trips.
Yes, and the first trip we were fascinating because the Normandy beaches were the ones we were crossing, and we were slotted to be one of the first ones over there.
Mm-hmm.
There were probably, 15 maybe LSTs operating around, but we had the honor of being the number one one to go, and the battle was not going well for us on the first day around Normandy.
You were at Omaha Beach,
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yes. Omaha had a slow process compared to the other beaches.
Mm-hmm.
So although we were originally designed to go in on the afternoon of D-Day, as we were going in, we were flagged to turn around and go back and stay overnight about 10 miles from the shore.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day we were told to go back in. And by the time we got in, almost all the German protective operations had no activity. Again, I can't say the word.
They'd been destroyed by the American soldiers.
They were being pushed back.
Did you, when you were offshore? I mean, we've seen newsreel footage and so forth. There were literally thousands of ships out there.
Sure.
What kind of a emotional? Do you recall? I mean, what you thought about? That's supposed to be the biggest armada in the history of the world. It's supposed to be there. It must have been just. I mean, I just wonder what you were thinking about that as you looked around and saw all those.
It's hard to be exact about what you remember and what you don't remember. But I don't remember a minute's fear.
Mm-hmm.
I had a job to do, so you did this, and so on. Just what you were doing. And that was through the rest of the crew. So there's something about warfare, especially if you think it's a necessary thing, and you got to do the best you can, and just say, well, my job is to do this, and if I know my brother had already died in a battle, so I knew that was a theoretical possibility, but I can't remember thinking about it a bit.
And when you must have been witness to the action that was going. Well, I don't know how far out at sea were you? How far away from the beach before you?
Well, we were, I think, around 6 miles,
also,
and then we would come through. But I don't know if I told you this the other day. On our second trip in, we got through the first one all right, and then we went back to England to pick up another load and bring that over. And as that was coming over close to shore, we were following a line of ships, and the one in front of us was an LSC, just like ours. And it was maybe 100 feet away. And I was conning the ship, my own ship, so I was right there at the conning station, and all of a sudden, the one in front was upside down. I didn't even see it turn or anything. It was just boom.
It hit a mine or something like that.
It hit some kind of mine. So that meant that when we being right behind them, we were real careful going in. And then 2 days later, when we were coming across the channel, and we were solo by that time, and we were hit by a mine, and a huge explosion, and lost a fair number of people, including the crew. I still have a vivid memory of one of our young guys, about 17 or 18, who had been in the crew's quarters when the thing blew up. He was near the crew's quarters, and he ran up to the open deck and jumped into the water for no reason at all. Mm-hmm. But he was, anyhow, that's part of what happens. People don't
get panicky, I imagine, at that moment. Yeah. And I can imagine that. Now, this was was this the third day of the third or fourth day of the invasion? Was this like by June 9th?
Third crossing.
Third crossing. Yeah. So you had to keep going back to England to pick up your. So you weren't coming off from a ship. I mean, you weren't being resupplied from a ship.
No, back to.
How long did that take to go back to England? And
maybe 2 days, something like that. A day to go back and start getting loaded up.
Did you have any? Did you see a lot of activity from the German aircraft, or had they been pretty well?
No, we did see a lot of it.
So I was thinking, like, when you were coming across the channel, you'd be kind of like a pretty good sitting duck out there, I would think.
Well, the German air operations was way diminished down there, and we had very strong air force, and because Russia was Germany was strongly tied up with Russia, and that was their biggest problem.
Yeah. Had on two fronts. You had them in the. You just answered this question. I asked you if you had a lot of fear, but you just said no. You just looked at the job that you had to do and you did it, and that was pretty much what all the people
around me.
And so that's a wonderful thing, I guess. I think sometimes those of us that sit back and look at what you did, it makes us fearful because we're not there at that situation. But when you're there, it's.
If you'd have been there, you'd have been there.
Yeah.
You'd have done it.
Yeah. That's what you like to think that. That's for sure. What were you most proud of during your military service?
Well, I can't think of anything right now.
You can't.
I might have said something
the other day. No, that was something I didn't get to yet the other day, and I saw that down. I think that just what you did, probably all in all, was the service that you performed was quite amazing. And when that LST 133, when it you got hit with a mine, what happened after that to that vessel, and what happened to you? What did you do at that point?
Well, we were struck by the mine halfway across the channel. Mm-hmm. So we were towed the rest of the way in and discharged our load of equipment, whatever we were bringing. And then we were towed back out again and towed back to England. And after a few days, I forget, we were then towed along the southern coast of Britain, and then turned around into the first big bay that comes in, which goes by the area called Wales. Mm-hmm. And one of the small towns in Wales, Barry by name, B-A-R-R-Y, they had a shipyard, and it was big enough to take us in. Mm-hmm. So we were taken in there, and in the course of maybe 6 weeks, I'm not sure right now at the time, we were patched up, and then from there we were towed back to New York City, where they had having removed our rear end and put a big blank to keep us leaking or anything, Then we were towed all the way back to New York City, where they had built a new rear end for us. And that was just tacked on, so to speak.
Welded on to the...
Welded on.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I left the ship at that point, but the ship continued on down the coast, through the channel, over to all the way across the Pacific. Yeah.
So it saw service in the Pacific.
Yeah.
The LST-133, when it was finished its service, after the war. What became of it? What happened to it?
It was broken up. I think it sank. It was sunk in a big operation. It was used as a testing of the atomic bombs.
And they sunk it.
I believe so. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I doubt if it'd be worth pulling some long distance. What would be left of it?
I just can't imagine maneuvering one of those through
327 feet long.
With 140 troops on board, approximately?
No, 100.
100. And you're trying to move that big thing through the barricades and during the middle of a battle. And
you got just two screws, which means that you can use them to help you
go right and left or straight.
Yeah.
It sounds like a momentous achievement to even get onto shore. There's not a whole lot of you veterans left to tell the stories, and the younger generations, mine included. I mean, I grew up, I was born right after the war, and my dad was very interested in it, and I had a lot of uncles and stuff, so I heard a lot of stories, and so I'm kind of in tune with what happened, but I'm worried. What do you think people need to remember about this time in history? The greatest generation, as it said, what you guys did for us, for the world, really. Now you have grandchildren and probably great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
Do they know what you did?
Oh yeah.
They do.
My youngest son took me to Normandy just a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes. Tell us a little bit about that. You met the Queen, and
the Queen met me.
Yeah, the Queen met you. There's rumors that she wanted to kiss you, but you
I have no doubt. I might have wanted to kiss her.
Yeah.
But the only historical part of this is that there are 22 nations that took part in the battles of Normandy. And one representative of each of those countries were put in a special place. I was the one for USA.
Wow. So you represented the military.
And so when the Queen came down, she shook hands with all those special representatives of the country.
And she spoke to you, right? She said something?
She said hello or something like that. I can't remember what she said, but I was pretty keyed up myself.
Yeah.
But those 22 representatives included the President of France, mm-hmm. And the President of the United States. So that was the third time in that day that I shook hands with them.
Did anything that happened during your service in World War II affect you for the rest of your life? And if so, how?
I have a hard time with that, mm-hmm. with that question, because I've had a wonderful life with lots of wonderfully good things happen to them.
Yes.
You know, and I don't know what could beat the 6 kids that I have, you know.
Absolutely. Well,
that kind of thing.
What did you do after the service? What did occupation?
I was looking for a job. I had friends in Kittery Point, so I came up here, and there was an opening in the Portsmouth High School. I had some interest in teaching, and I also had a considerable interest in theater, and they would pay me to coach their plays, which I proceeded to do for the next 22 years.
Wow. So did you do any Prescott Park things? Did you put any plays on in Prescott Park?
There weren't any.
There wasn't
any operations. It's too far back.
Yeah, too far. Okay.
But we had little theater programs in Portsmouth and in Kittery on the shipyard. So I put a good part of my middle life doing theater.
Oh, that's great.
Sold one of my plays, but only one.
Well, that's one more than most of us have sold, have even written, so that's pretty good. It's 100% better than I've done. That's pretty good. That's amazing, though. But how long did you teach at Portsmouth?
35 years.
At Portsmouth High School. So do you remember the year that you retired?
Yep, 80.
1980. So anybody who's listening out there, you may well have had Mr. Alvord as a teacher, and you can send in your comments, and we have.
I do bump into people every now and then who were my students.
Wow, it's a good feeling, isn't it?
It is.
Teaching is a good profession, and it certainly is. Actually, I have two questions. One of them was, you talked about a sign in the sky that you saw at one point. And
as the ship was being pulled back off the coast, when our ship went inshore, we would leave an anchor in the sand on the way in, so that we could keep tension on that, and that would keep our ship
like on course, would keep you on target.
Yes, but also it holds the ship. If you went in and tides came this way or that way, your ship would be pulled around and you'd be messed up. But if you kept had something in the sand to hold you, and that meant that when you were going to get off of the shore, you would pull on that anchor to help you get out straight. And then when you got out far enough, you would either pull up the anchor if you could, or if you couldn't, well, you'd cut the rope.
So that's amazing. That's neat. I didn't know they did that. Yeah. And at one point,
as they were pulling us off, that to me represented safety, And I think I looked up in the sky and saw a great arch with the words, "Go home and marry Jean Drake."
And she was here the other day, and she verified that. But she said she didn't see the same sign. I must.
Well, she didn't see the sign.
Yeah.
So when I got back and wanted to get married right away, it took her several months to realize it.
And you've been married how many years now?
70.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, that's absolutely amazing. Well, as we finish this up, Mr. Alvord, I'd just like to ask you one final thought here. Is there something that you would like to share with us, or an important question I may have forgotten to ask you that you'd like to share? I know that the other day you spoke about all the wars that the country had been in, and you had an opinion about that and how it compared to World War II. So that might be something you'd like to share with us.
The incident that jumps into my head is that we had a member of our crew, and his job was to keep track of all the safety controls of our water tender was the name of his job. And that guy had a rough time. He came out of New York City. He was married. He was sent down to New Orleans. He proceeded to have another love affair and another child. And then he moved to some other place along the coast, and another woman, and another baby. And then he got assigned to our ship.
Probably a good thing.
Well, I knew this guy had a history, but he seemed to be a good workman, so I didn't have to do anything more about it. I told you about our seeing a ship suddenly capsize in front of us. And about people on the ship knew that also. So when we hit something and we don't know what's going to happen to the ship, this guy's job is to go down to the bottom part of our ship. The bottom part of our ship probably had something like 8 units, great big spaces, which were separate. If the bottom of the ship was pierced, it would go back in. And so in order to be aware, do what you can about that problem, you go down and the word is dog. You undog your unit and go in there and make sure that it's not, the bottom is not pierced. And then you go on to the next one, undog the door to get out of the place you are, dog the other one and go into that one. And that means going in and out of at least 6, maybe 8 of those units. Now, what would it take you, what kind of remuneration would you want to take in order to go down and do that, having seen that ship ahead of you collapse?
I know, it's amazing, because when you open one of those doors, it's got water in it, and...
Or if you're down in it, and you dog down, and it opens out, can you undog it and threaten the whole rest of the ship?
Yeah, wow.
Anyhow, that kind of, I'm thinking the word character, I'm not sure that's...
Courage.
Courage, whatever. But this is something that, without the best, quote, character in the world, with the world that he created around, he went without a hesitation down and did his job down there.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, is an example to me that if something's going to be done, do it. And don't think too much about the possibilities. If it's a clear need for you to do it, do it.
And I will ask you to just tell me, and this will close with this, you said something the other day about all the wars that we've been involved in and how World War II was different.
I have been critical about American history and our experience with... We build ourselves up and think of that everything we do is right. George Washington was a hero and everybody else was. I found somewhere along in my early college years, I found I could make a very good case against our taking part in this war, and this war, and this war, and this war. We had a whole string of them in our history. But I couldn't think of one argument against our participation in World War II. The ones that we've done since that time, they can make very good cases against them. But I guess there's one thing I'm glad of is that if I had to be in a war, I was in a justifiable war.
It is vital that the sacrifice and the reasons for that sacrifice are never forgotten.
And it may be that just by their presence here they will help carry the message of D-Day, what it represents and what it helped build, to a younger generation. Should old acquaintance be forgot, they sing, and for these men it surely won't. But when they're no longer here to remind us, what then? James Mates, ITV News, on the Normandy beaches.